Welcome back everyone to the Minecraft modding tutorial. Today we're finally going to get started on that tile entity. It is highly unlikely that we will finish this today. I'm going to record 30 minutes and that'll probably get edited down to be a few minutes shorter than that. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a machine that presses ingots into metal plates of some kind. And later on we'll make it so it can use forge energy as well. So we're going to need a block, same as before, which means we'll need a block state, the models, a loot table, a recipe to craft it. And then we're going to need a tile entity, which is what some blocks have, which allows them to store extra data but beyond what a block state could have. And it can also have a consistent ticking behavior, where it does something every tick. Normal blocks only get random tick updates every so often, and that doesn't happen at a regular frequency. It's just random. It's like how crops and trees grow. So for the tile entity, we'll also need a tile entity type. We'll be getting to that. Then we'll need a container. Not all tile entities need a container, but if we want to be able to open it and interact with it like you can a furnace, we will. So that's going to be handling the slots for the inventory, and it's sort of like a proxy between the client and the server. It allows some degree of communication between those two sides. And we'll also need a screen class, which was previously called a GUI, a GUI. This is client only. It's going to be getting some information from the container. And finally, we'll need a new type of recipe, so we'll need a recipe type for that, and a serializer to actually deserialize our JSON files for the recipe. So this is quite a bit of work. That's why this is not going to get done all in one part. Okay, so I went ahead and borrowed the metal press textures from Silent Gear. It's still using placeholder textures because I haven't gotten around to making those, so just going to go ahead and use those. So let's go ahead and get started in the registration class. We need a few more deferred registers. So we're going to need one for container types, and this is a generic class, but we don't actually care about what type we're storing in this case, so we just put the wildcard question mark there. And this has a forge registry, of course, called containers, so it's pretty much self-explanatory. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and extract a method here. Add that as a parameter, call that registry, and move this down here. Okay. Just let me fix the formatting here. Okay, so now we can replace all of these with that method. Just create. It just makes it a little bit easier to read. Oh, yeah, that needs to be a forge registry of... Yeah, this needs to be a generic method. Okay, this is probably why I didn't do this originally, because it's a bit complex. iForge registry entry of T. Okay. Yeah, so generics in Java can be a bit tricky, but that's how you could create that method. Or you could just keep doing it like before. Okay, so we're also going to need one for tile entity types. So like the containers, it's tile entity type of something. And finally, we need one for recipe serializers. And that is also generic. It's iRecipe serializer of something. Okay, and we need to call this register method on all of these here. Alright, and we're going to need to create some classes related to this as well. So I'm going to go ahead and follow the convention I've been using of having just one for each type. So mod tile entities, or tile entity types might be a better name for it. Okay, so we'll have a static void register method, just like all the others. And I'll go ahead and just copy this. Okay, call those register methods, which are just there to class load everything. And there's no particular reason to keep these alphabetized. I just do that for sake of consistency, making it easy to find something if I miss something. Okay, so that should be everything we need done here. I'll go ahead and close that. And there's a lot of interconnected pieces here, so we're going to be all over the place putting these together. For now, let's go ahead and make the block. So we don't even have a package for blocks yet. I'm going to go ahead and create one. And I'm going to stick a packageinfo.java file in there. I'll go ahead and put these two annotations on there. Just, that's not really necessary. It just kind of helps with some warning messages. Okay, and part of the reason I put that packageinfo.java file there is so I can create a new package and still be able to drop stuff into blocks without having to kind of work around how it collapses the structure. So I'll just call this metal press. So without that packageinfo.java, this would just be combined into one thing. But now if I need to add a class in here, I can just right click on that, new class. But we're actually just going to be adding stuff here for now. So let's call it metal press block. That will extend the net.minecraft.block.block class. Need a constructor. Why is that obfuscated? I have no idea. It's kind of weird. Yeah, there's actually, like, all of our parameters are obfuscated right now. Why is it like that? Okay, I'm not really sure why all the parameters are obfuscated. Maybe that's just a thing with the official mappings right now, although... yeah, I do remember seeing some other obfuscated parameter names now that I think about it, so... maybe that's just something Forge hasn't fixed yet. All of my projects still use MCP, so that's why I was a bit confused about that. But yeah, deleting all the temporary files did not help, so we're just going to work with it. Okay, so while we're here, let's go ahead and give this block a facing property similar to what furnaces have. With the way I plan to do the textures right now, it's not going to look any different no matter its facing, but that's fine. So this is kind of unnecessary, but just saving a reference to the property, which is just kind of helpful. And there's a bunch of predefined block state properties in this file here. Horizontal facing is just a block that has only horizontal facings. It can't face up or down. Okay, so we're going to override a few methods here. And the shortcut for that is Control-O. I know I'm terrible at mentioning the shortcuts, but we want hasTileEntity, which is always going to be true in this case. And another way I often override methods is just typing in part of the name, so whichever way you prefer. And in this, for this, we don't have our tile entity yet. I'm going to go ahead and just remove the null there so that it throws an error, because we need to fix that soon anyway. Now I'm going to override onBlock I need to figure out what onBlockActivated is called because of the official mappings. Wow. Okay, so I believe this is the method we're looking for. It's called use. It is marked as deprecated, but this is in fact the method we need to override. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and fix these parameter names here. So the convention for block state is to just call them states. World. In MCP, you'll often see like world in if the name would match the name of the class aside from capitalization. For block pauses, we just call them pause, POS. Player entity is player. Hand will be hand. And block ray trace result can be ray trace. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and suppress the deprecation warning there. And you'll see I've got a bunch of other warnings here, which are parameters are non-null by default. I'm going to go ahead and copy this package info file I've got here into the metal press package as well. And no, I don't want that. So that's what these two annotations are for. Parameters are non-null by default, so we don't have to put non-null on every single one of them. Okay, so now for the body of this method. First, we're going to check if the... Okay, I guess it is client-side. That is remote in MCP. And in that case, we're going to return success. So now, at this point, we are definitely not on the client side, we're on the server side. So this is something we want to do on the server, but not on the client. And the reason we return success on the client is so the player swings their hand like they're interacting with the block. Now, I'm going to go ahead and call a method that I've not yet created. So we're going to call it interact with. And we're going to pass it the world, the pause, the position, and the player. And then we're going to return action result type.consume. So let's go ahead and create that method. And here is something else that we're going to have to come back to in just a moment. Actually, I'm just gonna say return some random value that doesn't make sense in this context, so that has an error there, just so I don't forget. So let's go ahead and override a few more things that are not related to the tile entity. So we've got a getStateForPlacement method, which appears to have the same name as it does in MCP. And in this, we're going to return this.getDefaultState, which is also renamed. Okay. Default block state. That must be it. And on that, we're going to call... Well, I've got to figure out what this method is called as well. It's not with anymore. setValue is probably the one I'm looking for. Facing, and rename this parameter to context. In MCP, this is getPlacement horizontal facing. Get horizontal direction must be it. And we're going to call getOpposite on that. So this is basically just making the block face a certain way, depending on the facing of the player placing it. Okay, now we need to figure out what onReplaced is. Actually, checking the abstract furnace block class might be the fastest way to figure this out. Looks like onRemove is the one we want. Okay, so that's another deprecated method, but it is the one we want, unless I'm mistaken. So go ahead and just rename the parameters for readability. Oh, there's two states. call this one new state then. And this last parameter is called isMoving in MCP, so I'll go with that. So the first thing we want to do here is check that we are in fact removing the block we're thinking we are. So we're going to check state dot, got to figure out what this one's called as well. State dot is, I guess. Yes. So state dot is use state dot get block. Then in this case, we need to get the tile entity, and we don't have our tile entity class yet, but that's fine. Let's see. Get block entity, of course, right? Because Mojang calls them block entities. So yes, as someone pointed out, they haven't actually replaced the class names with official yet, so that's why we still have tile entity instead of block entity. It's pretty much just the method names right now by the looks of it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do an instance of check, but since we don't have our proper class yet, I'm just going to check that it's an iInventory. Then we're going to call inventory helper dot drop contents, pass it a world, the position, and our tile entity as an iInventory. And then we also want to call world dot, what's it going to be? Something to do with comparators. I'm really starting to wish I'd figured this all out beforehand, but I just don't have a lot of time available right now. Update neighbor for output signal. Okay. Set the position and this, which is a block parameter. Finally, below this inner if statement, we're going to call super.onRemove. Pass it all the same parameters. Okay, and I'm going to try just copying in these last three methods, see if that works. State.setValue there. Does that get value? Yes, okay. Okay, and fill state container has definitely been, has a different name. Create block state definition, I guess. So rotate is just something is trying to rotate the block. Mirror is basically flipping its direction. And create block state definition is basically tells the block what sort of properties its block states have. And I believe that's all we need right here, aside from fixing the two errors. So let's go a little bit further just so we can get this class into a state that we could technically build it. So I'm going to go ahead and create the tile entity and see what the furnace normally does. So that extends lockable tile entity and extends all of those interfaces, which I'm pretty sure we are not going to be using all of. Okay, so I'll go ahead and extend the same one here. Same class. And then which of those interfaces do we need? I think we need eye-sighted inventory. The two iRecipe ones we don't need. I think those are just for the recipe book, which last I checked mods can't even work with. And we need iTickable tile entity. Let's go ahead and implement all the methods it needs. And it's going to want a constructor too, of course. Oh boy. We're going to have a lot of fun with this. So let's go ahead and fix some parameter names and such here. So yeah, we got a lot of methods we're going to have to implement for this, and a bunch more methods that we're going to have to write to make it do what we want. I'm curious, that iTickable method, okay, that's still called tick. I believe that's the same as NPC. Here it is, all the way at the bottom. I usually like this one to be further up. At the top, because that's where the most interesting code is going to be. Really quickly, let's go back to the block class, and we're going to return a new instance of the tile entity here. We don't have the type for it yet, unfortunately, but should be able to do the interact method now. Actually, for the constructor here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that parameter out, and we're just going to pass it in here. So we're not going to be extending this, so that's perfectly acceptable. But I need to write the interact method next. And that's a pretty short one. So what we're going to do is we're once again going to get to tile entity. So world.getBlockEntity at the position. And we're going to go ahead and check to make sure it's the right type. So check that it is a metal press tile entity. And we're also going to make sure the player is a server player entity, since we will be needing to cast them to that. So let's go ahead and cast our tile entity here. And we're going to call network hooks.openGUI. We're going to pass in our player, casting it to server player entity. We're going to pass in our tile entity as well, which the actual parameter here is an I-named container provider. And we could also add one more method, which I think I'm going to go ahead and do. I'll go ahead and add this near the top for now. So I'm going to make this package private, but not giving it any access modifiers. So just a void method, we're going to call it encode extra data. And it's going to take a packet buffer parameter. So this packet buffer class is mainly used for sending information between the client and the server side. And we're going to be making use of this a bit more, so don't forget about it. But currently we're not going to do anything with this. One thing I like to do is to pass the size of this thing called an int array that we will likely have on this class, but we don't have that yet, so I'll go ahead and worry about that at another time. Okay, and finally back at the interact method, we can pass that method in as a parameter. So we're passing a method reference there because it wants a consumer of packet buffer. That method takes a single packet buffer and is a void method, so that fits that interface type. And that method will be called whenever we're opening up the tile entity and sending data to the client. So I've already gone over 30 minutes, but I'm going to really quickly here just make the block and the tile entity type if I can. We can actually make this a registry object of metal press block. Just call it metal press. Metal press block. Properties.of. Give it the metal material. Strength. Let's make it 420. And the sound will also be metal. Sound type.metal. Okay, now if we go to mod tile entity types, I'm going to go ahead and just copy in a method here really quickly. So, yeah, that's not going to work. Okay, so this is what I ended up going with. It took me a minute to figure out the best way to handle this, since I was referencing Silent Gear, and it's got some classes that don't exist in Forge, so I had to work with it a little bit. So let me go ahead and just break this method so the parameters aren't separate lines, and of course they're still way over there. Okay, never mind. So what we've got is a supplier of a tile entity here. And I chose to just pass in the registry object of the block itself and only allowing the one block. You can technically have multiple blocks here, but we've just got the one for this tile entity type. So same as with the other stuff we've registered so far, we're calling the deferred registers a register method. We're passing in the name and a supplier of the thing that it's going to register, which in this case is a tile entity type. We're using this tile entity type.builder class, and we're calling it of method, which is create an MCP. We're passing it the factory method for the tile entity, which is its constructor in this case. And we're also getting the block at this point. And it's very important that you do not pass in the block itself in this case, because this code will get called and this object, this registry object, will be created before the block itself is registered. So we need to pass in either a supplier of the block or the registry object. We can't access the block until it's ready. And the null here is something to do with Mojang's data fixers. It's not something I know whether or not mods can even make use of, but it's certainly not something we need in this case, so it's null. It wants that to be non-null, so I've got this here just suppressing that warning. Okay, and I believe at this point we have no compiler errors. So we could technically run this, but it won't do a whole lot. In fact, we haven't even created the block state file or the models for the block or anything. All we've got is the block and the registered tile entity type, which doesn't do anything. So I think you could see at this point why I said this takes a lot of work and is going to be multiple parts. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this here. I've got 50 minutes of video footage to edit down. So that's going to be fun. So thank you for watching. Next week, I'm most likely going to be starting a new job, so I will not have nearly as much time as I did. I'm going to try to keep this series going at least until we're done with this, but I honestly have no idea how long it'll take. So please be patient with me. I'm doing everything I can.